At last, there are signs of spring. I've always been interested in the outdoor world, from the time I got really close to a wild rabbit on a walk with my dad, to the books I make today, which have as many animals and plants and landscape as I can shoehorn in. In the last few years, I've been increasingly fascinated by birds, their relationship with each other and with other bird species, their form and flight and their colours and characters. Now that spring is really here, I feel drawn outside like an emergent insect, looking for spring flowers and listening to the different calls of birds. I've been pondering why it's so important to me and why I find myself bringing nature into my work so much. Humans have been drawing animals for thousands of years on the insides of caves, on pieces of parchment, on stone and in sand. It somehow gives us a context and an understanding of who we are and what we're doing. After a long winter, there's something so calming about the growing season starting again. For me, it's a physical thing. I can literally feel the weight lifted from my shoulders. Maybe that's a throwback to when winters were so hard that people didn't survive because of hunger or cold. The fresh green of the new leaves, the flowers promising fruits and berries, a new sprouted seed that will one day bear a tomato. March is a great time to spot wild hares on the hills and in fields. The grass is short enough so that they can't completely hide, and they're also looking for a mate. In the UK, we have brown hares which were introduced from Europe a long time ago, but in Scotland we have mountain hares which are native. If you've ever seen them boxing, you might think that it's the males trying to prove who is the fittest, but actually it's often the female and a male. It might be that she doesn't like the cut of his jib and doesn't think he'll give her very good offspring, so she bats him away and won't mate until she finds her ideal chap. I'm using some rough watercolour paper, so it does have quite a texture to it. The pencil that I used was a woodless graphite pencil, and that gives a lovely strong line. But before I start with any watercolour, I'm going in with some water-soluble watercolour pencils just to give a bit of underlying texture to the hare's fur and also the grass in the foreground. If you saw my video last week, then you'll know that I'm having some fairly serious health issues at the moment, and it's making life a little bit tricky. But the one thing that certainly seems to be helping me to feel better and recover is doing this. So I didn't want to miss a week of videos. I've been uploading now weekly for over 2 years, and I didn't want to break that now. So I've decided this week I'm just going to do something that I really love doing. Then in my usual way of working, I'm starting with whatever is furthest away, and that is the cloud in the sky. And then the furthest hills and moorland, and gradually working my way forwards towards the hares. I really love working with wet in wet with watercolour because you can get these amazing effects. And just dropping a little bit of blue into that cloud and watching it spread, it just makes me happy. I love that. Doesn't it look good? I did quite a bit of research for my book, The House on Hare Hill, a picture book about a hare who gives up boxing and takes up yoga. They really are fascinating creatures. If you want a copy of the book, I'll leave a link. It has some really interesting facts included, like, did you know that unlike their cousins, the rabbits, hares live above ground for their whole lives? They give birth and move their babies to different parts of their habitat so that if a predator finds them, they're not all together. Clever, eh? I also wanted to make sure that the colours further away were more muted. So I put a little bit of the navy bluish in with that green just to knock it back a little bit so it's not so much detail. And then the further forward I'll make it much brighter greens. My mum taught me a lot about gardening when I was a little girl. It's always given me such pleasure to get my hands into the soil and tend to something that might give me food or just pleasure looking at a plant. Some people think there is something about the soil that actually wards off depression or anxiety. Perhaps it's the minerals in the soil, but you hear many a gardener say they need to get outside into their garden each day for their mental health. Coming further forward, I mixed some blues and a little bit of yellow in with that colour because I was thinking of the heathers that are out at this time of year, and just to bring that forwards just a little bit more. These trees in the background and the little farmhouse and the hedgerows that lead up to the farm are all quite important because it gives us some setting. So I've again used some fairly muted colours for these bits because I don't want them to stand out, but equally they are quite important. So I think, I'm thinking of a sort of moorland farmhouse, maybe somewhere in Yorkshire, with a single track road that leads up to that farmhouse. That's kind of the setting that I had in mind when I first made this picture. But just to give it perhaps a little bit of focus, although not too much, I've also just dropped in some colours into that little hedgerow that leads up to the farmhouse, just because, again, I'm thinking of the sorts of flowers that might be out at this time of year. There's not a huge amount of colour going on, but there are the heathers and gorse and a few other sort of native plants that are flowering at this time of year. So I think that just gives it sort of points towards the house, so it shows us that there is life. It's not just about lots of green fields and the animals that live in it, but also that we people also share that habitat. You may have heard me before say that green is one of my favourite colours, if not my actual favourite colour. So no surprise here that I'm going to go in with some vibrant greens just to bring all of that further forward. And again, I'm doing wet in wet, going over some of those pencil marks I've already made to blend them a little bit, because I want it to be sort of blended between the watercolour and the pencil marks I've already made, but still retaining some of that texture. And the colour that I used from my watercolour set was a very bright sort of leafy green colour. Just very carefully going around the hairs to make sure that all of that area is quite well covered. Although, you know me, if you've seen my painting before, you know that I quite like leaving white areas, because I think the white also helps to highlight certain areas, and I just like making the paper do a bit of work. So going in with different greens from my palette and going wet in wet so that it does fade into the distance a little bit, but I will be doing a little bit more detail in a bit with a pencil. So going into a wet surface with your watercolour pencils is actually quite nice because you get a very strong line from it and you get lots more pigment laid down onto that surface. If you're wondering how to tell the difference between a hare and a rabbit, well, rabbits have pretty smallish ears in comparison to hares. They have much bigger ears, much longer back legs as well. If you see a hare standing up on all four legs, then its bottom will be slightly up in the air because its legs are so long. I love drawing foxes and badgers, woodland scenes, squirrels and birds. It gives me a focus that I don't really get from other things in my life. I can begin to lose all my worries, let my mind rest from the everyday things that are going on. Now just dropping a little bit of ochre or slightly darker brown onto those hares to start blending the colours that are already down there with the pencil. And just giving a little bit of definition to the various parts of the body, like the ear that is furthest away from us is going to be slightly darker than the ear in front. If you've ever tried meditation or mindfulness, then doing something creative, whether it's painting or drawing, clay making, filming, sewing, whatever, it's an easy way for your brain to rest from those beta waves. And that's what happens when you calm your brain in meditation. It's kind of giving your monkey mind something to do, like giving a hyperactive child some blue tack to play with. Now just going to go in with that pencil again whilst it's still quite wet and just pick up a few more details, the tops of the ears, and then just wetting that a little bit to make sure that it blends properly, giving it a bit of shadow and form. And then the detail of the eyes and the nose. I've given these hares blue eyes. I'm not sure, I think they're probably more like an orange, but I decided to do blue because it fits in with my colour scheme a little bit more. So if you're looking for realism, you might just want to check a photograph to see what they really do look like. But you know me, I don't really do a lot of realism, and although this is quite different to my normal style for my books, it's just something that I felt right. It just, sometimes you just got to feel the groove and decide how you're going to approach something. I really hope that you've enjoyed this video. Do drop me a comment. Your lovely comments and words last week have really kept me going through a very tough time. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you want more content on drawing and publishing. Take care of yourself and I will see you next week. Nanu nanu!
If you'd like further artist tutorials, I have a variety of short courses that will help you. There are real-time sessions looking at painting, drawing and marker pens, among others. And if you're keen on producing your own book, there is a more in-depth course on what you need to know about self-publishing a book with illustrations. And that covers making key decisions, how to make layouts and dummy books, rhythm and pacing, as well as several tutorials on illustrating your book, and a look at the tech. You can either hop over to my website or join me on Patreon for more information. Go on, give it a go!